Hi, everyone. Welcome to a third session of the EOSC Quorum Marketplace Provider Days, which is on FAIRification of data and services. As during all the previous sessions, we are collecting your inputs via Slido, and we'll show you how you can join in the next slide, which is the overview here that you see of a QR code and a link to join, and we'll also post this in the chat. We are starting this session with a presentation by Patricia Herterich. She will present FAIRsFAIR's services framework. Patricia is a research data specialist at the Digital Curation Centre at the University of Edinburgh, and her current work focuses on contributing to various projects enabling FAIR research data and managing the DMP Online service. So Patricia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and I hope you can see my slides okay. I'll introduce the work that we have done in FAIRsFAIR on an assessment framework for services. That was part of a task in FAIRsFAIR that really looked at FAIR services and was set the objective to deliver an assessment framework for data services that will help service owners to incrementally improve their services and thus stimulate an optimal interplay between digital objects and services and help realize the full potential of a truly fair ecosystem. We tried to address the a recommendation from the Turning FAIR into Reality report, and that work was focused on implementing recommendation number 13 on developing metrics to certify FAIR services. Though we didn't get to the certification stage, as I will tell you in the next 10 minutes. We started with some guiding principles that this framework that we're working on should be inclusive to a wide range of services, should be comprehensive, and ideally it's something that is actionable and service owners can actually take away and use. How did we get to the framework? We had like a few pillars on that we were working on. We did structured literature review of existing assessment frameworks for services, but we also looked at all the tools that were developed to assess the fairness of data sets. We looked at case studies, looking at services that are out there and that you can find in the EOSC marketplace, for example. And we looked at how the services currently support enabling fair data. We ran sessions at the EOSC Cup week, gathering feedback there as part of a workshop. We also did interviews with semi-structured interviews with a range of service owners, and we asked them in more detail how they see their service currently enabling fair data and what they would want to get from an assessment framework, what they would find useful in a framework, and make them use the framework in the end. And then once we had a first draft, we did a lot of community review, and we hosted quite a range of interactive workshops where we really asked for feedback from service owners, and also collected examples where people already are addressing some of the recommendations we came up with in a quite a good way that could be an example for other services. The results you can find on Zenodo now. It's a fairly short report, only 20 pages. We really tried to keep it to the essentials, and it's a set of a total of 50 recommendations for service owners, covering 7 different aspects that we looked at. those aspects we split into things that we thought are more technically orientated and to do with the actual technical running and implementation of the service. And then a few that are more socially oriented, more looking at the governance and the human beings involved with running the service. And the way our framework is structured for each of these 7 aspects, you have an objective that the recommendations are trying to support. And then you have like a set of recommendations. As you can see here, they are actually each have their identifier, so you can identify them easily. And we've also followed the example of the FAIR data maturity model working group, and we've assigned priority levels to those recommendations, highlighting those that we think are a bit more crucial and others that are rather nice to have. So that means that you can use the framework in you can use the parts that you find useful. You can use individual aspects of it to look at the recommendations and apply them to your service. You can say you only want a subset of like essential recommendations and just look at those. So there's like really ways to work with what we've created to make that suit your needs as a service owner. I'll now just talk you a bit through the objectives of the 7 individual aspects, so you can decide which one you want to dig into more at the end. The one that probably makes this a standalone framework compared to some of the other examples that are out there is the aspect of FAIR enablement. Obviously supporting that the service enables FAIR data by hopefully elevating the fairness of the digital objects or supporting the FAIRification process. So for that we have actually looked at levels of in which a service affects the fairness of a data set or digital objects. And we're basically really looking in that recommendation on as services that enable fairness in either augmenting the fairness of a digital object, for example, by automatically assigning persistent identifiers, or facilitating the fairness by allowing to apply metadata. And that aspect is supported by 6 recommendations. The other technically oriented aspects, we have 11 recommendations supporting quality of a service, so that the service is delivered in a reliable, secure, high quality way, consistent with the specifications. And we also have made open and connected an important objective. Though FAIR isn't the same as openness necessarily, we think there are still a range of recommendations, and it's still important that the service is operated in a low barrier and inclusive way, and that it connects to other services and thus still champions some of the principles of openness. On the more socially oriented aspects, there are 4 of them. One is user centricity, with the objective that the service is managed so that it serves the goals of its user community and maximizes usability for them. Transparency is also important, and we gave it a separate aspect supported by 6 recommendations, that the service provider communicates transparently with its stakeholders. We've also looked at longevity and ensuring that the service is designed with a time frame of maintenance, so it doesn't have to run forever, but it has to be transparent about how long the service will be sustained, and have measures accordingly implemented. And also one aspect is ethical and legal, that has 6 recommendations supporting how the service complies with all applicable legal and ethical guidelines in a transparent and auditable way. So just to wrap this up, how do we see people using the framework? And this is based on our own experiences as the team that created it and applied it to the services that we are running. At this stage, it's very useful to check your own documentation and processes and basically see where you might have gaps, where your service could be improved, and how you can become better at becoming fair enabling and a better service in that area. It is not useful at this stage to use that framework and assess a framework that assess a service that you're not involved in as an external auditor. That's not what it's for, and that also wouldn't work very well. It's at the moment to be applied by humans, so it's not machine actionable in any way. You won't get a score or a badge that you've passed the framework in any way, and it's not for showing off. So this is basically how far we have got with the framework. We've submitted it to some of the EOSC Association task forces, and it's also out there for any of the upcoming European projects or anyone to pick that up and run with it if you want to improve base any work on that. Please do, and please give us feedback. But with this, I think I will hand over to Robert to introduce, or Katrin first to introduce Robert, sorry.
Thanks a lot, Patricia. So next presentation will be by Robert Huber, who will introduce the, I'm not really sure how to pronounce this. I should have asked you, Robert, but I assume Fuji? Yeah. Robert is a marine geologist and information specialist working at the PANGAEA working group at the Center for Marine.
So the first talk is
University of Bremen. He is responsible for projects in the field of ontology development, marine observatory network, scientific data, and FAIR data in general. What I also wanted to mention is that both Robert and Patricia are joining us from the FAIRsFAIR project, and I want to thank them a lot for helping build this session, because FAIRsFAIR has ended, but they were still willing to come and talk to you here today. So with that, Robert, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to introduce you to the FUJI tool. Yeah, FUJI basically was developed during the FAIRsFAIR, you mentioned that already, project in task 4.5, which was about performing pilot FAIR assessment on data sets from trustworthy data archives. And during this task, we developed 2 main components. First, we developed FAIR assessment metrics, and the second component are tools to perform these assessments. So both components are addressing this turning FAIR into reality report, which was already shown by Patricia. For this task, we followed a use case based approach. We identified about 8 distinct use cases which were aligned along these research data lifecycle, which is shown here on the right side. And actually we developed 2 tools. The first one was FAIRAware, which was about assessing or raising awareness for fairness before researchers deposit the data in the trustworthy data archive. And the second tool is what I'm going to introduce now. This is FUJI, and the tool is addressing the scenario 6 and 7, which is about assessing fairness of data sets which are already deposited in a data archive. So just a few remarks on the acronym. So it's all spelled FUJI, like the famous Japanese volcano. The word is derived from a Malaysian term, UJI, because one of the developers, or the main developers, is from Malaysia. UJI means a test or assessment in this language, and the F, of course, stands for FAIR. And we have chosen this minus just to distinguish the tool from the famous company and to avoid troubles with them. So the metrics we specified during FAIRsFAIR were based on prior work, which have been performed during several projects like FAIRDAT and FAIRENOUGH, and they also have been aligned with the RDA data maturity model, as well as the well data system RDA data fitness for use checklists. We developed these metrics in an iterative process, which involved several stakeholders, including data publishers, but also international initiatives like OGC, RDA, of course, and the World Data System, and of course the EOSC FAIR working group. And as a result, we have developed or defined 17 metrics. The current version now is 0.5. It's published on Zenodo, and also you can take a look at it on the FAIRsFAIR webpage. Yeah, so these metrics were the basis for defining several practical tests, which we plan to implement by the automated assessment tool by FUJI. The approach here is hierarchical for each FAIR principle. So we can have one or more metrics, and also for each metric we can have several practical tests. So this is an example here about the metric to test if persistent identifiers are present. So one practical test can be, for example, if an identifier is or can be recognized by persistent identification schema or syntax, and the second test is, for example, if the identifier is can be resolved. So if it really exists. So more details on the methodology is available here in this report, deliverable 4.5, I think, so which is also available on Zenodo. So FUJI actually is a REST service. It's based on the OpenAPI specification and implemented in Python, based on, for example, the Swagger library and some others. So this example here shows shows how the output of FUJI looks like. The response of FUJI always is a JSON string or file, which includes several information which are relevant for understanding the test result. Of course, it shows you if the test has been passed, or it gives back a score, which can give you an indication how well the test was passed. And it is also returning a detailed debug messaging list, which gives more information on what actually happened on the background. So what FUJI has done to perform the test. So the result also includes information on the basis of the test results. So in this case, for example, it gives a list of metadata which has been identified by FUJI. So this is an overview on the high level flow of how FUJI is collecting metadata and data which it needs to perform the assessment. FUJI accepts an identifier as input, an URL or a persistent identifier, and additionally users can give a service endpoint. Currently we support Open Archives initiatives, Sparkle, or the OGC catalog for the web standard. Based on the identifier, FUJI tries to resolve to the landing page or whatever is the PID resolves to, and tries to extract metadata from there. FUJI actually uses some standard technologies which are very common to extract or reach additional metadata pages, like while extracting metadata from the landing page. It is following typed links. It is performing content negotiation and so on. So FUJI is mainly based on domain agnostic metadata standards like schema.org or Dublin Core, but also FUJI understands a number of domain-specific metadata standards to extract metadata. In addition to these identified metadata, FUJI is also using third-party information. It is trying to identify an entry in refree data, for example, and tries to find out if the repository supports additional metadata standards, and it is also using the service endpoints I just mentioned in order to also identify more information on delivered metadata. So then FUJI is using all these metadata to perform the individual tests or metric tests I just mentioned. In addition to this REST service, which is quite hard to read, which is for machines, we also offer now a web client demo for FUJI, which is available on f-uji.net, where you can try the tool and perform your own FAIR assessments on your data sets. So this web client gives you well, a user-friendly visualization of the test results, basically. So a summary score, an overview information on the FAIR level reached for each principle, and it also gives a nice representation of the detailed test results. So what we learned during the FAIRsFAIR project, and in particular during the pilot assessments, was that the FAIR assessment of research data object is possible, and it is possible to support a very large and diverse community. So the pilots we investigated came from various disciplines, and in addition to the 5 initial pilots, we also have been approached by other other disciplines and other data repositories, for which we also performed such assessments, and which was quite interesting and successful, I think. So these pilots led to iterative mutual improvements. So the fairness of each of the pilots could be improved. So we actually delivered recommendations, and so the pilots tried to implement that. So this was very good. And at the same time, we were able to improve the FUJI tool. In summary, I think the best use for FAIR assessment or FAIR assessment tools like FUJI is to combine this with a face-to-face FAIR consulting process, just in order to avoid to just stare on the reached score, but to try to improve the fairness and to find ways how to actually, well, expose, for example, metadata in a fair way. Regarding the uptake of FUJI, so as has been mentioned, the FAIRsFAIR project is over. So far, the community which is supporting the open source code, FUJI is open source, is growing. We have 12 contributors by now, 18 initiatives forked the tool. So we have 3 clients now. One is delivered by the project FAIRsFAIR, and 2 others are from outside. There's an R client, for example, developed by a team from the German National and the NFDI. By now, about 10,000 individual tests have been performed using the FUJINet website, and several thousand dataset assessments have been performed during repository-based tests, so like these pilots I just mentioned. So these repository assessments also now include some well, interesting new communities, like, for example, the Charité Berlin has used the FAIRsFAIR tool to compile this nice FAIR dashboard, which is displayed on the right side, which is well, an overview on the fairness of medical data they use internally. It is used, for example, by the University of Valencia, and also Novartis has contacted me. They are trying to use the tool for internal reviews, or well, whatever. So the tool has also been the basis, or has been used as a tool for scientific publications. So this is a list what I found for the moment. So the Peters van Galen team has used FAIRsFAIR to develop a discipline-specific well, fairness evaluation recommendations. Here, the May team has investigated the fairness transparency of COVID-19 related data sets. And myself, I have also used FAIRsFAIR in a study which has tested data sets from the environmental community. So this shows that there's quite a lot of interest in the tool, and well, we are happy to be able to continue the journey in summer, when we are going to take part in the FAIR Impact project. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Robert, for that interesting presentation, and good to hear that there will be some follow-up projects to FAIRsFAIR, or at least part of the FAIRsFAIR project. Then we have one presentation left, which is by Paolo Manghi, who you might remember from the first session of the day, and who you will see again in the coming days. Paolo is a technical director of OpenAIRE's infrastructure, and he is involved in a myriad of Horizon research projects on EOSC and research e-infrastructure. And in this session specifically, he will present the OpenAIRE Validator. So Paolo, go ahead.
Thank you, Catherine. How much time do I have? 10 minutes.
Yeah, you have 10 minutes, and I would advise you not to go over that, or we really won't have any time for questions.
Yes. I'll try to be as quick as possible. Okay. So, excuse me?
Now we can't see your screen.
Okay. Now you should be able to.
Yeah,
okay.
Amazing.
Okay, so OpenAIRE Validator. First of all, just a little bit of context. Of course, the fairness is an extremely important measure that we should all take into account, despite, of course, the differences between the different disciplines. It's extremely important to come down to similar, let's say, conclusions of what fairness, at least at the technical level, can be. So what we can measure in terms of the metadata available and so on. So you can always think of fairness at different level of granularities, of course, meaning that we can measure fairness of an object, like FAIRsFAIR was now describing, but also then apply it as a consequence to a collection of objects. So, for example, all the objects coming from an individual data source. And of course, we can extend it, since it's about metadata and about, in fact, the quality of the metadata, at least what the results of the fair maturity groups are. We can also extend it to any kind of research product, as long as some of the metadata fields that we believe are extremely important for the clarity, the description, the findability, etc., of the objects are made available. So in the context of OpenAIRE, we have been collecting metadata records from data sources for the last 10 years. Okay? And when we collect these records, we also include validation tools that are expected to measure and give feedback to the original data source managers, repository managers, institutional repository managers, thematic repository managers, feedback on the quality or the expected quality of the metadata. This is because OpenAIRE was born since the beginning within the community, and defined within the community some minimal expectations of metadata quality. which are then being used by the European Commission for tracking, for example, project results, assigning, linking them to projects and measure impacts overall. So today, basically, we have a set of guidelines within OpenAIRE that we can match against different repositories. So the service that we provide is called Provide. As a repository manager, you can sign in, you can register, you can claim which is your data source, which is your repository, which you can select from a large number of registries out there, like 33Data, Open Door, Fair Sharing, and so on. So you can pick your data source from there, complete the metadata description, providing your technical requirements, so how the system can collect your metadata objects, and then you can start the validation process. Okay. The validation process is based on specific set of guidelines that we are providing for literature repositories, for data repositories, for CRIS systems. All these must comply to expectations, which are standards, again, defined by the community. We never have reinvented the wheel here. And you can go through this validation. It's a sort of assessment. You're given a score, you're given feedback on this field is wrong in that sense, you're using the wrong vocabulary terms, your data format is not compliant to that and that. So it came quite natural to extend this kind of thinking to the notion of fair assessment, okay? So the simple concept is that for each record we provide the measure of fairness based on the Fair Maturity Group extension, and we provide then an overall rank for the data source as a whole. So we started by the latest set of guidelines that we have defined, namely the OpenAIRE Guidelines for Literature Repository 4.0, which is a data site profile defined as an application profile that can provide certain conditions. I'm not going to describe the guidelines here, but it's again a mixture of different application profiles. Starting from this, we analyzed which fields in these guidelines can be associated to the F, the A, the I, and the R. Okay, so the idea was starting from the Fair Data Maturity Model as we know it, going through these 4 main points. Okay, and trying to let's say assign each field to one of these potential perspectives of the fairness. Okay, so findable, accessible, etc., and giving them a rank based on the mandatoriness or the optionalities of these fields, and based on the recommendations that we have on these fields on the guideline. So for the findable, for example, we identified the fair indicator, the priority, and the fields that are required by the guidelines that are related with it, and so on. Okay, so we did it. We did this exercise with the accessible, which is the same. Again, I'm not going through all the fields, but for example, the access rights are here. We did it for the part of interoperability, and here we have, for example, subjects, formats, node representation across different domains, etc. We did it for the reusability, and again, license is at the center of this, and as many others. As a result of this process, anyway, we have identified, let's say, the rules that allow our validator to measure the overall compliance of a data source to the notion of fairness of the maturity guideline. And we offer it as a service through the user interfaces that you've seen before. This will be made available through the EOSC Future, and will be ready after the summer for the September delivery, next release of the EOSC Future. And that's it. I hope I was fast enough.
Yeah, Paolo, thanks a lot. You really got us back on time. So we're going to start showing the Slido now, and I'll forward you some questions. The first one from Susanna. I'm afraid, Susanna, I don't know the abbreviation, so I'm really hoping one of our speakers can help out there, but the EOSC metric CF is addressing the lack of common tests and tools delivering different results, holding a set of hackathons with tool owners. I think, is that just a comment, or do you want some clarification there, Susanna? Feel free to unmute yourself.
Yes, no, I just wanted to flag as a comment, as for information, because even FAIRsFAIR is participating to those hackathons. I think it's important to realize that the task force in EOSC is also addressing that very specifically.
Okay, maybe if you want to, you can post the link for people to register or take part in those hackathons if they're already available. You can post that to the chat, then people have that.
Yes, I'm going to, although there seems to be by invitation to people that have tools,
okay,
because it's hackathon hands-on. So the people are, all the people that have tools have been invited, including Robert. Okay,
that's great to hear then, and we're looking forward to news on that. Then a next question I would want to address is whether the onboarding process and fields to fill will be connected to the fairness and fair enablement framework, and then specifically for resources already onboarded. So I'm guessing that we're talking here about resources that have been put into EOSC and whether those fields connect to fairness and fair enabled framework. So maybe Paolo, that question is best for you. So
I wouldn't say, for the moment at least, that fairness can set the condition for being onboarded into the EOSC. So let's say they cannot be, you cannot have a minimal measure of fairness for the moment as a rule of participation to the EOSC. I think instead that it's extremely important to have such a measure and to make it visible, and also to clarify which are the data sources that are fair and to which extent, and why they're not and why they are. I think this is extremely important in general, as a push for others to do better, but also to understand the problem, because we know that fairness is by definition a vague concept when we are working across disciplines, and I think it would be unfair for the moment to use it as a way to discriminate the resources provided by EOSC providers.
Okay, thanks. I'm hoping that that clarifies. If not, feel free to unmute yourself. In the meantime, we'll have a look at another question, which is someone asking whether OpenAIRE and FAIRsFAIR are implementing the same set of validation rules. So maybe Robert, you can talk to that.
I think there is an overlap between the tools, of course, because FAIRsFAIR is also testing similar metadata standards like the OpenAIRE tool does. But of course, well, the OpenAIRE tool has another focus and another objective in comparison to FAIRsFAIR. And also, well, I mentioned that already, FAIRsFAIR is relying on the FAIRsFAIR metrics, which definitely will be different from what has been defined in OpenAIRE. So, but there are overlaps.
Yeah, there are by definition overlaps. So I think it's important to have tools that are able to come up with a score with respect to certain rules and validation rules. Okay, then the definition of fairness may vary, and so these tools should be ready to be reconfigured to address different kinds of measures, different kinds of understandings and interpretation of the rules. Then, of course, as FAIRsFAIR did, we also tried to implement the rules that have been defined by people who have thought a lot about it, like the Fair Data Maturity Group, right? So we didn't come up with a new way of understanding things. And if more rules will come up, probably we'll make it available, as a tool for all these rules to be evaluated, because this has to be the way to go. Ideally thinking, you should have a registries of potential rules which may apply to this community or that community or that community, and have tools that are able to verify at the record granularity or at the data source, so collection granularity, the level of adherence or the threshold that you reach for such fairnesses. So this should be the most flexible scenario, I think.
Okay, there's a similar question there, but it relates to the overlap or the connection between the fairness and fair enablement framework that was presented by Patricia, and then OpenAIRE. So maybe Patricia, you can give some extra explanation about that, whether there's a link between the two of those.
We have not linked them up, but I would guess that if we use OpenAIRE Validator or if Paolo's team use the framework, they would score quite well, because they've obviously thought quite hard about especially the fair enablement part of it, yeah, they could just look at the recommendations and as the service they are providing. I understood what they are providing is closer to FUJI, thus to a data set level, but it is obviously a service that is out there and running, and probably would make a good case study when applying the framework on the service level, but we have not brought them together in any way outside of the session.
We are of course available to give it a try and to pilot it.
It's good to see that you're making plans during this session even. I'm going to take one more question, and then we'll need to wrap up, I'm afraid. But someone is asking whether there's any plans for tools to evaluate the fairness of services as well. I don't know which one of you wants to take that, maybe Robert or Paolo?
Yes, this is a difficult issue, of course, because I mean, services are by nature so different from data sets and other research products. So this is really, I think, hard to assess, and I'm not aware of a tool or something which is trying to do that. So there are some initiatives, and it's also planned for the follow-up project of FAIRsFAIR for fair impact to, for example, assess fairness of software and some other types of research products. But I don't know of any approach to test services.
Paolo, Patricia, do you know of any approaches there, or is it? Yeah, it seems more complicated.
Yeah, that I know there is also no general agreement. If with fairness of data you have doubts, with fairness of services you are in deep dark. So the problem is what you can do automatically. You already have big issues with data, okay? Because checking fairness of data from a metadata record is really a guess, okay? Because what's behind the quality of the data, the metadata, if the metadata describes effectively the data that is behind, this is only for humans to understand. You can of course try to do some things, but what you can check is very limited. For services, I think it's even worse in many ways, because if you imply how a service supports the user in a way that is fair, then it's of course something that you cannot deduce automatically.
Okay, I see that Matthew Viljoen has his hand raised. So Matthew, did you have a eureka moment, and do you have an approach to this, or do you want to add something else?
Just really to add my thoughts against it. So I think that the EOSC portal is helping with the fairness of services, in that the EOSC portal list of services makes the services findable and accessible. I think the EOSC interoperability framework will help with the interoperability of it. With usability, this is a little bit more difficult to actually define. I think this is the hardest one, but for the other three, I'm pretty confident that these are being addressed as part of EOSC.
Yeah, but Matthew, we were talking about validation.
Yeah.
Of course, any action that you do to make the services more fair makes them more fair. The problem is, how can I evaluate this automatically? And this is quite of a dream at the moment that I know.
Yeah, because I see that some people in Slido as well have actually used the tools during the session to test their data sets. So that seems to go relatively quickly. I think in terms of doing that for services, there's so many different things to look at that can't be checked automatically, that it would be a more complex process, especially given the range of services that are made available. I want to wrap up, but I saw that there's a question about someone is asking, like, there's a lot of tools for validating this, what makes FUJI different and how is it connected to EOSC? So I think, Robert, I want to close on your elevator pitch for FUJI. Why is this the tool to use?
Yeah, so what the main thing which is different for FUJI is that it is built on the FAIRsFAIR metrics, of course. So this is the approach we have chosen for the project. And this is also then distinguishing the tool from other tools which are using other metrics. Basically, the tests the tools are using are similar, but sometimes, well, as I mentioned, grouped differently into the metrics. So this makes it different. In terms of usability, I think FUJI is, well, very easy to use. It's very fast. It delivers well, first and very transparent results, which gives you a good impression on the fairness of your data set. So this is, I think, a really user-friendly tool. Regarding EOSC, it is not yet connected or listed in the EOSC catalog. So this is also a plan for the FAIR Impact project to better link the tool to EOSC. So, for example, to list it in the catalog, make it available and visible there. So this is planned for the FAIR Impact project, which will start this summer.
That's great to hear. I'm assuming you know how that works, but if you wouldn't be up to date with the latest, we have a session tomorrow specifically for reporting results from EU projects, so maybe you can join there.
Yeah.
I'm sure that Paolo can connect you to the right people as well, and I'm sure you'll find them in the chat here. On that note, I want to wrap up. We'll see you again, hopefully, in about an hour for the session on the EOSC portal. In that session, we'll run through the resource catalog, the marketplace, a quick note on how to onboard, then the providers portal, and then the EOSC profiles and any automated updates there. So I'm hoping to see you again then. Enjoy lunch and see you then or tomorrow during the other sessions that we have. And thanks very much to our speakers, and thanks again for FAIRsFAIR for being here post-project. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye-bye, everyone.